in the quiet expanse of time, far before the rise of cities, kingdoms, or even the first sparks of recorded history, there was an earth that moved slowly, patiently, under the rhythm of nature. The winds carried stories across open plains, seas whispered their eternal songs, and the mountains watched silently as countless generations of life emerged, flourished, and faded into memory. It was during this deep and ancient time, almost 900,000 years ago, that a chapter in the human story unfolded, one that still lingers as a mystery today. A chapter where nearly all of our ancestors, perhaps 99% of them, vanished from the earth, leaving only the faintest thread of survival. Imagine, for a moment, a small community gathered around a fire, not unlike you might picture today, but simpler, quieter, older. These were not modern humans as we are, but our distant relatives, early forms of humanity who walked the same ground, breathed the same air, and gazed at the same stars. They lived in groups that were fragile and tightly knit, their survival dependent on food, shelter, warmth, and one another. They did not know that a great silence was about to spread across their world, that soon their kind would dwindle almost to nothing, that a near ending of their existence was on the horizon. The earth itself was shifting. Long cycles of climate wrapped the planet in alternating ages of warmth and cold. These cycles moved slowly, over tens of thousands of years, but to the life caught within them, they were forces as powerful as any storm. Around 900,000 years ago, one of these great shifts took place. Glaciers began to grow. Ice crept downward from the poles, locking away water, reshaping coastlines, changing forests into grasslands, and grasslands into deserts. Seasons stretched longer, harsher, more unforgiving. In this world, survival was no longer a gentle rhythm, but a difficult struggle. For ancient humans, who had no cities, no agriculture, and no technology beyond stone tools, this change would have been profound. Where once there were rivers flowing steadily, now drought might appear. Where once animals roamed in abundance, now they grew scarce. Where once forests provided shelter, they receded, leaving open, exposed ground. In such a time, food would become harder to find. Clans would wander farther, searching for game, roots, and berries. The fires they built would need to burn longer against the cold. And slowly, without warning, the numbers of humans began to shrink. Archaeologists and scientists who look back at this age find something strange, something almost haunting. In the genetic memory of our species, there is a mark of near extinction, a bottleneck, as it is called. It is as though, during that ancient time, humanity was pressed through a narrow passageway of survival, reduced to only a few thousand individuals. Imagine the vastness of the earth, and yet, within it, only a scattering of small groups, hidden away in favorable valleys, clinging to life by the thinnest margin. This near vanishing is not written in stone tablets or carved in monuments, for none of those things existed yet. It is written in the quiet code of DNA, carried in each of us today, whispering that long ago, our ancestors almost disappeared, 99% gone. Only a fraction endured. How it happened is still a mystery. Some say it was the climate shift, the deepening of the ice age, the cooling of the air, the spreading of droughts. Others wonder if it was not only the cold, but also changes in the animals that humans depended on. Herds may have moved, dwindled, or vanished. Plants that once fed our ancestors may have failed to grow. In such a delicate balance, even a small change could be the difference between survival and collapse. There is also the question of other human species, for in those times, our lineage was not alone. The earth held many kinds of humans, cousins, and relatives of our kind, each adapted in their own way. Some were stronger, some more clever, some better suited to certain lands, but they, too, were vulnerable. And as the world shifted, many of them would face the same trials. The mystery is not only about why nearly all ancient humans died, but why a small few managed to survive. Picture a single valley, perhaps in Africa, where the climate was just gentle enough, the water just reliable enough, and the food just abundant enough to keep a group alive. Perhaps it was here that the thread of humanity was preserved. Perhaps they looked out across the plains, seeing fewer and fewer fires in the distance, fewer signs of life, and understood in some deep way that they were among the last dot. It is a humbling thought, to imagine that every person alive today may be descended from just a few thousand individuals who lived through that time. It is as though the tree of humanity, once broad and full, was pruned back to a single, fragile branch. And yet, from that branch, life continued, grew, and flourished once more. When we reflect on this, it reminds us of the delicate balance of existence, how survival is never guaranteed, how even a species as remarkable as ours can come close to vanishing. And yet, it also shows resilience. For even in the harshest times, even when the odds seem overwhelming, life can endure. Close your eyes and imagine the night sky 900,000 years ago. It would look much the same as it does now, stars shimmering softly, the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light. Perhaps our ancestors gazed at it, wondering, just as we do, about their place in the universe. Perhaps they felt small, fragile, uncertain, and yet, in their survival, they carried forward the possibility of everything that would follow. The mystery of why 99% of ancient humans disappeared is not one we can fully answer, but the story it tells is not only of loss, it is of endurance, of continuity, of the unbroken thread that leads from that distant age all the way to you, here and now, listening in the quiet of this moment. And so, we drift deeper into the story, letting the images of that ancient world form gently in the mind. The cool winds of the Ice Age, the flicker of fires in the night, the soft footsteps of our ancestors crossing grasslands now long gone. Their world was harder, but also slower, simpler, a world where the rhythms of nature guided all things, and where survival meant living closely with the earth. The story of our ancestors continues, stretching across the long expanse of deep time. To imagine what life was like 900,000 years ago is to step into a world both familiar and alien. The land itself was wild, untamed, and shaped by the cycles of the ice. Rivers carved wide valleys, carrying meltwater from distant glaciers. Grasslands spread where forests once stood, their tall blades swaying in the wind. Herds of great animals wandered these plains, massive, powerful, and unlike the creatures we see today. Some resembled elephants, but taller, covered in thick fur. Others were ancient relatives of bison and horses, adapted to the cold and the scarcity of food. Predators, too, roamed here, their calls echoing in the night. Lions, larger than those we know, stalked silently. Saber-toothed cats crouched in the tall grass, their long fangs glinting in the pale moonlight. It was into this environment that early humans moved, small in number, fragile in strength, but carrying within them the intelligence and adaptability that would one day allow their descendants to master the world. They lived close to the land, dependent on every sign, every track, every subtle change in the air. The rustle of grass could mean danger, or it could mean food. The call of a bird could reveal the presence of water. The faintest trail left in the soil could guide them to the herds that sustained them. Survival demanded attention, patience, and a deep knowledge of their surroundings. Yet even the keenest knowledge could not protect them from the forces of climate. As the earth grew colder, resources became scarcer. The cycles of abundance and hunger grew sharper, more punishing. A season of poor hunting could wipe out a group. A drought could force them to move, leaving behind familiar ground and risking the unknown. Each journey carried dangers, storms, predators, rival groups. And slowly, over thousands of years, the numbers of humans declined. This decline was not sudden, not a single event, but a gradual thinning, like sand slipping quietly through an hourglass. One generation might survive, but fewer children would live to adulthood. Another generation might endure, but sickness or famine would take its toll. In some places, entire groups may have vanished without a trace, leaving only silence where once there had been voices. And so, little by little, humanity's presence in the world grew faint. Imagine the loneliness of those who remained. A small band, perhaps a few dozen people, traveling together through a vast and empty landscape. The fires of other groups no longer visible on the horizon. No echoes of laughter, no distant voices carried on the wind. Just the sound of their own footsteps, the crackle of their own fire, the beating of their own hearts. They may not have understood it as we do, but they must have felt it, the sense of being few, the sense of being fragile, and yet they endured. We know this because we are here. Somehow, against the odds, a small remnant survived when nearly all the rest were lost. What carried them through? Perhaps it was adaptability, the ability to eat many different kinds of food, to live in many different environments. Perhaps it was cooperation, the bonds of family and community that allowed them to share burdens and support one another. Perhaps it was something as simple as a valley spared from drought, a river that continued to flow, a herd that remained abundant in one corner of the earth. Whatever the reason, their survival carried the spark of all future generations. From their children and their children's children, the long chain of humanity continued. Every one of us alive today can trace a line back to those few who endured the great bottleneck, who kept walking, kept hunting, kept tending fires, kept living. This thought brings a kind of calm perspective. So often we see ourselves as separate from the past, imagining ancient humans as distant and different. But in truth, they are not so far from us. They felt hunger, they felt warmth, they loved, they feared, they dreamed. The rhythms of their hearts were the same as ours, and in their survival, they carried forward the chance for us to be here, resting in this moment, listening to their story. When scientists study the genetic record, they see the traces of this near extinction, a narrowing of diversity, a sign that our ancestors were few in number. They call it a bottleneck, and it is like a fingerprint left in our DNA, a reminder of that fragile time. But the details remain uncertain. Did the population fall to only a few thousand, or perhaps fewer still? Where exactly did they live? What landscapes sheltered them? These questions remain unanswered, their solutions hidden in the silence of the past. What we do know is that climate played a great role. Around 900,000 years ago, the Earth was entering one of its long cold phases, when ice spread further and the balance of ecosystems shifted. But the Earth's climate is not simple, it is a pattern of many cycles woven together, cooling and warming, drought and rainfall, abundance and scarcity. To live in such a world was to live at the mercy of forces far beyond human control. And yet, there is something remarkable in the resilience of those who endured. Imagine them gathering around a fire on a cold night, the stars overhead bright and countless. They would have told stories, as humans always have, stories of the hunt, of the land, of the spirits they felt in the world around them. These stories would have given meaning, given comfort, given continuity. Even in the face of hardship, they would have found ways to make sense of their lives, to connect with one another, to carry hope forward. The silence of extinction pressed closely, but the flame of survival burned on, and in that flame lay the promise of all that would come: art, music, language, culture, the vast flowering of humanity that we know today. When we think of 99% of ancient humans vanishing, it may sound like an ending, but in truth, it was a beginning, for it set the stage for everything that followed. Out of fragility came strength, out of scarcity came innovation, out of near loss came the chance for renewal. And so, as we drift deeper into this story, let us walk with those ancestors in our imagination, step by step, across grasslands that no longer exist, along riverbanks, long since dry, beneath skies, unchanged yet forever ancient. Their journey is our journey, their endurance is our inheritance, and their mystery is our reminder of the delicate, precious nature of life. Asterisk. The world of 900,000 years ago was shaped by rhythms greater than any human life could measure. Seasons rose and fell like tides, yet beyond them stretched cycles of ice and warmth that lasted tens of thousands of years. To live in such a time was to live not only by the sun and the moon, but by the vast breathing of the earth itself. When the climate cooled, glaciers spread across continents, carving deep valleys and leaving behind seas of stone and dust. Forests shrank, grasslands spread, and the animals that once thrived in warmth moved southward, searching for more forgiving lands. Human groups, too, followed these shifts, walking across vast distances with patience that only survival can teach. Their feet pressed into the soil of places that today lie beneath water, or beneath modern cities, yet then were wild and open, filled with the sounds of animals now long gone. Picture for a moment the ancient steppe at dusk. The air is crisp, and the grass sways gently under the wind. In the distance, a herd of mammoths moves slowly, their enormous silhouettes outlined against the fading light. Closer to the ground, smaller creatures scurry through the shadows, seeking shelter for the night. And near a cluster of low trees, a group of humans tends a fire, its glow flickering against their faces. They are weary from the day's travel, but the warmth gives them comfort. The crackling of the flames blends with the night sounds, calls of owls, the distant cry of a predator, the steady rustling of the wind. For these people, life was lived entirely in the present. The past was remembered in stories, in scars, in the knowledge of where to find water or how to set a trap. The future was uncertain, a horizon they could not see, shaped by forces they could not control. Yet within this present moment, they carried everything that mattered: their families, their skills, their determination, and the quiet hope that tomorrow would bring another chance to endure. The decline of their population was slow, almost invisible from the vantage of a single lifetime. One child lost here, one band separated there. Yet, over centuries, the effect compounded, and what had once been many became few. Still, each group lived as if they were the center of the world, for in their eyes they were. They knew little of others beyond the horizon. The silence of disappearance might have seemed no different from the silence of distance. Scientists who look back at this time do so not with eyes but with tools, traces of stone, fragments of bone, and the long code written in our DNA. What they find is evidence of a thinning, a narrowing of the genetic record. It is as though humanity passed through the eye of a needle, and only those few who survived carried us forward. This genetic bottleneck is a whisper across time, telling us that our species once stood on the edge of vanishing. But to dwell on disappearance is only half the story. The other half is survival. Even as challenges mounted, our ancestors adapted. They shaped stones into tools with care, crafting edges that could cut, scrape, and pierce. They learned to use fire not only for warmth, but for cooking, softening roots and meat, making food easier to eat and safer to digest. They found ways to work together, to share burdens, to protect the young and the old alike. These simple acts, repeated countless times, became the difference between extinction and endurance. In the stillness of a night so far removed from us, one can imagine them sitting around their fire, looking into the flames. The sparks rose upward, joining the stars above, and in that quiet, perhaps they felt the same wonder we feel when we gaze into the night sky. The stars would have looked the same then as they do now, ancient, timeless, countless. Beneath their glow, the small band of humans felt both fragile and eternal, a part of something larger than themselves. Their voices would rise softly as they told stories. Stories of hunts successful and failed, of animals both feared and revered, of ancestors who guided them, and spirits that lingered in stone, water, and fire. These stories were more than entertainment. They were memory, teaching, connection. They bound the group together, giving them strength through meaning. And as the wind carried the smoke of their fire across the steppe, the stars bore silent witness to their survival. The world they lived in was raw, unyielding, and yet breathtaking in its beauty. Wide rivers shone under the moon. Endless plains rolled toward the horizon. Glaciers gleamed under the sun, towering and immense. For those who walked this earth, there was danger, yes, but also a deep intimacy with the land. Every stone, every tree, every sound carried weight. Their senses were tuned to this world in ways we can only imagine. As the centuries stretched on, the population remained low. Perhaps there were times when only a few thousand humans walked the earth. To us, that number sounds impossibly small. Yet within those few thousand hearts burned the flame of all humanity's future. They may not have known it, but every breath they took carried forward the chance for us to exist. And so, in the silence of deep time, humanity endured. Fewer in number, but never entirely gone. Fewer in voice, but never fully silent. Fewer in strength, but still carrying the will to live. If you close your eyes now and let your imagination drift, you can walk beside them, step into their world, hear the crunch of frost beneath your feet, smell the smoke of the fire mingling with the cold night air, feel the rhythm of the journey, the patience of long walking, the gratitude of a meal shared. You are connected to them, not by memory, but by blood, by the unbroken line of survival that ties you to those distant ancestors. This is the calm truth at the heart of the story. Though 99% of humanity may have vanished in that distant age, the 1% who remained were enough. Enough to carry life forward, enough to shape the path ahead, enough to ensure that after so many ages, you would be here, listening to their story, finding rest in the gentle flow of time. The night stretches on, and with it, the endless unfolding of time. Imagine yourself lying on the cool earth, the stars spread out above you like a river of light. You can feel the ground beneath your body, solid and eternal, and you can sense the distant hum of the living world around you. Somewhere in the distance, the mammoths continued to graze. Somewhere in the dark, A pack of wolves moves silently, their paws making no sound against the frozen soil, and near the glow of the fire, humans breathe slowly, resting after the long day's journey. Their breaths rise in mist, soft and rhythmic, blending with the crackle of the flames. Children curl against their mothers, lulled to sleep by the warmth and the sense of safety that the group provides. A hunter stares into the fire, lost in thought, remembering the chase of the day, replaying every step. An elder hums softly, a tune passed down through generations, a melody without words, yet filled with meaning. The sound drifts into the night, quiet and steady, a reminder that even in times of scarcity, there is still song. Life was never easy, but it was full, rich with sensations and meaning. Each sunrise brought not only struggle, but beauty. Red glow of dawn spilling across wide plains, the shimmer of frost clinging to grass, the slow melting of ice under the warmth of the sun. These moments gave rhythm to existence, marking time not in hours or days, but in feelings and experiences. To live then was to live deeply attuned to the earth, with no barrier between the self and the world. Outside. The reduction of humanity, the narrowing of our population, was not a sudden calamity, but a slow thinning. A quiet dwindling stretched across millennia, a long winter, with no clear end in sight. And yet, within that long winter, there were always moments of light, a successful hunt, the birth of a child, the spark of new fire. These victories, however small, were enough to carry them forward. Scientists who peer into this distant past describe the population drop in numbers, tens of thousands, shrinking to mere thousands. But for those who lived it, numbers had no meaning. They did not count the total of their kind. They counted only what was near their kin, their companions, those who shared the fire with them. Beyond the horizon, other bands lived and moved, but they were like shadows, rarely seen, their existence assumed but not certain. For each small group, the world was both vast and intimate, filled with distance, yet reduced to the closeness of a handful of lives. At times, hunger pressed against them like an unyielding hand. At other times, warmth and food were plentiful, and for a brief while, there was peace. The cycles of the earth gave and took, and the people learned to bend. With them, they gathered what they could. They learned to follow the migrations of animals. They sought the shelter of caves when storms raged, and they used fire to push back the cold. These were not luxuries, they were survival. And through them, life endured. As you listen now, let your breath slow to match theirs. Inhale, exhale. Imagine the rhythm of ancient footsteps, steady and unbroken, carrying them across landscapes now forgotten. Imagine their eyes lifting to the same stars that watch over you tonight. Imagine the calm of the fire, the comfort of the group, the timeless sense that even when the world feels vast and uncertain, there is safety in togetherness. Though humanity was reduced to a fragile thread, that thread never snapped. It held, stretching across time, through countless generations, until it reached us. And as you rest now, you are part of that unbroken line. Every heartbeat you feel is the echo of theirs. Every breath you take is a continuation of what they once began. Their survival is your existence. Their story is your story. In the soft quiet of the night, the people of long ago closed their eyes. The fire burns low. The stars turn slowly overhead. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new hunts, new journeys. But for now, there is rest. And in their rest, there is hope. Time drifts forward, slow and gentle, like a river flowing without end. Centuries pass, then millennia. The world changes, reshaped by ice and thaw, by drought and rain, by growth and decay. But always, in every age, in every condition, a few humans endure, carrying the flame forward. Step by step, moment by moment, they bring us closer to the present. And as we drift with them, carried by the current of time, we are reminded of a truth both simple and profound. Survival itself is enough. To live, to breathe, to endure, is to shape the future. In their persistence lies the foundation of everything that was to come. The fire fades to embers, and the people of that ancient night drift into sleep. Their breathing is steady, their bodies curled close together, the warmth of their closeness pushing back the chill that seeps in from the edges of the world. The earth itself hums beneath them, ancient and enduring, holding them as it has held countless generations before. Outside the shelter of stone and hide, the wind moves gently, brushing against branches, carrying with it the faint smell of frost. and distant water. When the sun rises, the light is pale and low, spilling across a land covered in long grasses, their blades stiff with ice. The horizon stretches endlessly, painted in tones of grey and silver. In the distance, a herd of giant animals begins to stir, massive, fur-covered forms moving slowly across the plain. Their footsteps thud heavily against the frozen ground, each movement deliberate, each breath steaming into the cold air. These creatures, mammoths, woolly and immense, are like living mountains. And for those small bands of humans, they are both threat and promise, both danger and survival. The people move carefully, watching from a distance. They know the herd's patterns, they know the winds, they know how sound carries across open land. This knowledge is not written anywhere. It lives only in memory, passed from one generation to the next, through stories told in firelight, through gestures and lessons acted out again and again. For survival, the past had to be remembered. For survival, every detail mattered. And yet, for all their struggle, there were also quiet moments of wonder. Imagine walking with them at dawn, the air crisp and still, your feet pressing softly into the frost. Imagine looking out across a frozen river, its surface glistening like glass, the sound of cracking ice echoing softly in the distance. Imagine hearing the calls of birds wheeling above, their wings cutting through the air, reminding you that life moves in many forms. For these ancient people, the world was not empty, it was alive in every direction. Their numbers were few, yet their connection to the land was immense. They read signs in the clouds, in the shape of shadows, in the tracks pressed into mud. Every sound was a message, every smell a clue. The earth spoke in whispers, and they listened. The thin line of humanity stretched so close to breaking, yet because they listened, they endured. Their centuries passed, the cold grew deeper, glaciers expanded, slow and unstoppable, covering mountains and valleys, grinding rock into powder, shaping the very face of the earth. Forests retreated, animals migrated, rivers shifted. The world was in constant motion, even when it seemed frozen in stillness. And through it all, humans followed, adapting step by step, finding food where none seemed to exist, finding warmth in the simplest things, the crackle of fire, the sharing of breath, the shelter of arms. It is easy to think of survival as struggle alone, but survival was also beauty. Imagine the night sky then, untouched by any city lights, stars blazing so brightly that the Milky Way looked like a river of fire across the heavens. Imagine the stillness of snowfall in deep winter, each flake drifting soundlessly, covering the world in silence. Imagine the first shoots of spring breaking through the earth after months of cold, small green signs of life that brought hope to weary eyes. These were the gifts the world gave. Even in its harshest times, the population remained small, fragile, almost invisible against the vastness of time. But every person mattered. Every child born carried the future. Every elder carried the memory of the past. They were links in a chain that stretched forward endlessly, even though they could not see where it led. And in the warmth of their fires, in the closeness of their bonds, they carried something that numbers could never capture: the will to continue. As you breathe slowly now, imagine the rhythm of their world becoming the rhythm of your own body, the steady beat of footsteps on frozen soil, the quiet inhale of smoke from the fire, the gentle exhale of rest at the end of the day. In their lives, in their persistence, you can feel the shape of time itself, unbroken, flowing like a river. From then to now, they endured the long cold, the endless winters, the shrinking numbers. They endured hunger, storms, and the vast loneliness of a world too big for so few. And yet, they remained. Like the fire that never fully died, they carried the spark forward. And because of that spark, here you are, listening, resting, alive. The world remained locked in cycles of ice and thaw, ages turning like the slow breath of the earth. For those who lived then, the Great Cold was not a story or a legend. It was simply life. Glaciers stretched across continents, rivers froze, solid in winter, and winds swept over plains that seemed endless. Food was scarce, and survival hung on a thread. And yet, within this stark and demanding world, humans endured. Their numbers were so small that if you gathered them all together, they might fill only a single valley, perhaps even less. For nearly 100,000 years, humanity balanced on the edge of disappearance. 99 out of every 100 had been lost, and those who remained carried the weight of all who had come before. Imagine one of those tiny groups moving across the land, a handful of families walking along the banks of a frozen river. Their footsteps crunch on brittle snow. They keep close together, moving slowly, conserving their strength. Ahead of them, dark trees rise against the horizon, promising shelter and perhaps food. They move not with haste but with patience, for patience is survival. When the cold deepens, they find caves and hollows in cliffs, places where wind cannot reach. With stones and wood, they strike sparks, coaxing fire into life, watching as warmth pushes back the chill. The fire is more than heat, it is protection, a symbol of endurance. Around its glow, stories are spoken in low, steady voices. The words are not written, but they bind the group together. They remind each other who they are, where they have been, and what they must remember. For these people, time is not counted in days or years, but in seasons of hunger and plenty, in winters endured and springs awaited. Their children grow slowly, each one precious, each one carried in the hearts of the whole group. Every child is hope, a sign that humanity has not yet ended. And so, even in the darkest times, laughter still rises, soft and fleeting, like birdsong breaking through silence. The world around them is both harsh and wondrous. Across the frozen plains, massive animals roam, mammoths with long curved tusks, woolly rhinoceroses, and towering elk with antlers as wide as trees. Predators stalk the edge, saber-toothed cats, moving like shadows, cave lions crouching low in the grasses. The humans watch them carefully, respecting their power, learning their habits, finding ways to survive among them. Every hunt is uncertain. Sometimes the people succeed, bringing down enough meat to fill their bellies, enough hide to clothe their bodies, enough bone to craft tools. Other times, they return with nothing, their strength thinner, their steps heavier, and yet, they do not stop. Their persistence is their strength. They have no certainty, only determination, and it carries them through. In the silence of night, when stars spill across the sky, they look upward. Perhaps they do not name the constellations as we do now, but they see them, bright and countless, filling the heavens with light. They see the patterns of the moon as it waxes and wanes, marking the passage of time. They feel themselves small against the vastness of the universe, yet they also feel connected, for the same stars that shine on them shine on all living things. The bottleneck of humanity was not a single moment, but an age stretched across thousands of years, a long narrowing, where only the smallest fraction survived. The reasons were many: the deepening cold, the scarcity of food, the shifting of landscapes, perhaps even drought in some regions where water once flowed freely. Whatever the causes, the effect was the same. Humanity stood on the brink of vanishing, but the thread held. And as you breathe slowly now, you can imagine that fragile thread stretching through time, delicate but unbroken. Each person who lived then was part of it, their lives forming links in a chain that would lead all the way to the present moment. They did not know they were carrying the future. They only knew they had to endure. Step by step, they moved with the land, following herds, gathering roots, listening to the whisper of rivers and the movement of seasons. Their world was not easy, but it was alive, and in its vast stillness, they found ways to continue. The embers of fire carried from camp to camp, the memory of paths carried from elder to child, the warmth of closeness carried from one heartbeat to another. The story of how 99% of humanity was lost is not one of despair, but of resilience. For even when the numbers were nearly gone, even when the cold pressed hardest, there was still life, there was still hope, and from that hope, a future grew. The long winters stretched endlessly, and yet they always yielded, slowly, to springs and summers that offered brief reprieve. In those short months of warmth, the people gathered strength. Plants pushed through thawing ground, rivers loosened their icy grip, and herds wandered north to graze on fresh grasses. In those times of abundance, the small groups of humans breathed easier, though they never forgot how quickly the land could turn against them. Survival meant moving with the earth, not resisting her. People followed the rhythms of the land as one follows a heartbeat, steady, patient, unhurried. They learned to travel light, carrying only what could be held in their arms or fashioned quickly from the world around them. Tools of stone, sharp and reliable, became their companions. A well-crafted hand axe was more than an object, it was a lifeline, a key to meat, to safety, to endurance. Night after night, fire remained at the center of life. The flames crackled softly, the smoke curling upward into the dark sky. Fire brought warmth, and warmth brought calm. Around it, voices wove together, telling simple stories, recalling hunts, whispering lessons to children. These stories may not have been complex, but they carried truth. They reminded the people of dangers, of animals to avoid, of places to find shelter, of seasons to expect. In these words, the wisdom of generations lived, even when written language did not yet exist. Children grew up slowly in this fragile world. Each birth was precious, for every child represented the continuation of the species. Mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, elders and siblings all watched over the young, guiding their steps, teaching them the rhythms of survival. To lose one was to feel the whole group grow lighter, thinner, more fragile. To see one live and grow strong was to feel hope spread, steady and reassuring. The world itself seemed vast and unending. Forests stretched into the distance, rivers wound like silver threads across plains, and mountains loomed like ancient guardians. Glaciers crawled across valleys, grinding stone into dust, shaping the land into what we know today. But to the people who lived then, these immense changes were simply the backdrop of life. They walked where they could, settled where they must, and accepted the earth as she was cold, immense, unpredictable, yet sustaining. Food was never guaranteed. Sometimes, the hunt ended with meat to share, marrow to crack from bones, hides to stitch into coverings. Other times, the hunters returned empty-handed, and the group grew thin with hunger. In those moments, the people turned to roots and berries, to insects, to whatever could sustain them. Hunger was a constant teacher, reminding them of balance, of humility, of the fragile edge between life and loss. Still, even in the leanest times, there were moments of beauty. The northern lights swirled across winter skies, painting the heavens with shimmering greens and blues. The sound of rivers breaking free from ice filled the air each spring. The call of birds returning from faraway lands brought comfort. In these quiet wonders, the people found peace. Even when the world was harsh. For nearly 100,000 years, humanity lived in this narrow corridor of existence. The bottleneck was not a single sharp event, but a long and quiet narrowing, a test that stretched beyond the measure of a single lifetime. Generations came and went, each one carrying the thread of life forward, each one never knowing how close they stood to the edge. And yet, through all of it, they endured. Their endurance was not dramatic, but steady, like a river wearing down stone. Every breath, every fire lit, every step across frozen ground was an act of survival, an act that tied them to the future. If you listen closely now, you can almost hear their presence in the hush of the night wind. Their whispers move through time, reminding us that we are here because they were. Their lives were fragile, but their spirit was unbroken. And from that fragile beginning, the great story of humanity continued to unfold. Asterisk. The years turned into centuries, and the centuries into millennia. Though their numbers had once fallen so low, humanity carried on, step by step, fire by fire, breath by breath. Slowly, the fragile thread began to thicken again. Groups wandered across new lands, following rivers and coasts, settling in valleys that offered shelter and water, learning with each passing season how to live in balance with the earth. The Ice Age world remained vast and demanding, but people were no longer only surviving, they were beginning to grow. The long narrowing of the bottleneck gave way to a slow expansion. The landscape, though still dominated by glaciers and cold winds, began to change. Warm periods returned in cycles, stretching open the earth's arms just enough to allow grasses to spread, animals to flourish, and people to follow them. With each passing generation, the memory of those deepest struggles lingered quietly in the background. It was not remembered in words, for words had not yet been written. It was remembered in instinct, in tradition, in the silent lessons passed from parent to child, from elder to youth. Always, the people moved with the land, never against it. Always, they honored the cycles of the earth, knowing that the cold would return, knowing that plenty was fleeting, but that life endured when lived in harmony. By the firelight, more complex sounds began to flow from human voices. These sounds were the early seeds of language, shaping thought into rhythm, giving memory new form. With language, the bond between generations grew stronger. Lessons could be carried further, not just through imitation, but through spoken wisdom. Stories became richer, layered with meaning, filled with the pulse of experience. The bottleneck had refined humanity, not only in body but in spirit. Slowly, groups began to spread outward. Some followed the edges of Africa's rivers, moving toward grasslands. Others traced the coastlines, where fish and shellfish offered food more steadily than the uncertain hunt. Each step outward was careful, but each step added strength to the species. Humanity's roots were deep, but its branches were beginning to spread. The earth herself was shifting. Glaciers advanced and retreated, carving mountains, deepening valleys, and sculpting the plains. The air grew warmer, then colder, then warmer again, as the planet moved through her long cycles. Through it all, the people remained watching, waiting, adapting. Their lives were short by our measure, but they carried within them the infinite resilience of those who had faced the narrowest of trials and continued forward. As the numbers of people grew, so too did their ability to imagine. They began to shape not just tools but ideas. They painted with ochre on stone, perhaps to mark, perhaps to remember, perhaps to dream. They carved small figures, held close in the hand, symbols of meaning whose stories are now lost to us. Yet in these acts, there was more than survival, there was reflection. And with reflection, the first quiet sparks of culture. The bottleneck was fading behind them now, though its lessons would never vanish. Humanity was growing, cautiously, tenderly, yet with a persistence that could not be undone. In time, there would be many more challenges, other ice ages, changing climates, new landscapes to cross. But this early trial had planted within the species a strength that would carry forward across all ages. Tonight, as we think of those distant ancestors, we can imagine their fires glowing against the endless dark, their voices low and steady, their eyes reflecting the light of the flames. We can imagine their quiet endurance, their trust in the turning of seasons, their patience with the earth's slow rhythms, and in their story, we find calm. For the struggles we face today are but echoes of theirs, and the resilience that flowed through them flows through us still. The wind moves gently across the land, as it did then. The rivers murmur softly, as they did then. The stars glow in the night sky, as they did then. The world continues, vast and timeless, holding within it the memory of all who came before. And so, as you rest now, know that you are part of this long, unbroken chain. From the small bands who endured the great narrowing of life 900,000 years ago, through countless generations, to you here in this moment, the story flows, steady and unbroken. Humanity endured, and you are the living continuation of that quiet, patient endurance. Breathe softly, let the rhythm of the earth cradle you, as it cradled them. The story is long, and still it unfolds, but for now it carries you gently into rest, where the past and present meet in calm silence, and where tomorrow waits, patient and serene, beyond the horizon of sleep. As we drift further into this journey, let us imagine once more the rhythm of life nearly 1,000,000 years ago, when humanity faced its quietest, most fragile moment. The earth was a place of constant change. Vast glaciers advanced and retreated, in long, slow breaths, like a planet exhaling and inhaling across thousands of years. These icy sheets carved valleys and reshaped rivers, pressing down on mountains, and then withdrawing, leaving behind stone and soil newly exposed to the sky. The people who lived through this time, the small remnant of humanity that survived, would have known a world both immense and intimate. They did not see the globe as we do, mapped and measured, but as a flowing network of paths and places, each shaped by memory and survival. A single hill might carry stories of generations, a bend in a river might be a place of gathering, and the glow of a fire at night might represent the boundary of safety in a dark and uncertain world. Nights would stretch long, illuminated only by firelight and the stars above. Imagine those ancestors looking up at the same constellations we still see today. Patterns they may have named in their own way, shapes that reassured them of order in a vast and unpredictable universe. The stars would not only light their imaginations, but serve as guides, gentle reminders that even in times of cold and scarcity, beauty and mystery still remained overhead. Their lives were not fast, nor crowded with distractions. Time was measured in seasons and migrations, in the movements of herds, and in the return of birds in spring. The quiet of such a world is almost impossible for us to grasp now, living as we do in an age of constant motion and sound. But that quiet was their reality, and perhaps within it, they found a rhythm of thought and presence that we have largely forgotten. As the population dwindled to a mere fraction of its earlier size, every child born was precious, every life cherished. Survival meant more than just food and shelter. It meant carrying forward the fragile thread of humanity itself. Imagine a mother watching her child sleep near a glowing fire, knowing that in that tiny heartbeat lay the continuation of her people. It is in such moments that the survival of humanity was quietly secured, breath by breath, night by night. And so, we picture them not only enduring, but also finding ways to live fully in their small corners of the earth. They shaped tools from stone, learned the movements of animals, and carried with them the knowledge that had been passed down from countless generations before. Each lesson remembered, each fire kept burning, was a triumph against the immense odds of their age. In the stillness of these early nights, humanity endured. The world may have been cold, uncertain, and often harsh, but it was also filled with moments of beauty, with skies awash in stars, with rivers shimmering in the moonlight, and with the warmth of firelight reflected in watchful eyes. Let us wander deeper into this ancient time, where the earth was both familiar and yet profoundly different from the one we know. Imagine standing on a wide plain, the grass is swaying gently in a cold breeze, the air is sharp, crisp, carrying the distant scent of wood smoke and the faint call of animals moving across the horizon. The land stretches vast and open, broken only by the silhouettes of trees clustered along rivers, or the dark ridges of distant hills. It is within this setting that the small bands of early humans lived their quiet lives. Their world may have felt immense, yet their circles of movement were often small, bound by the need to follow food, water, and safety. They moved with the seasons, carrying little but memory, tools, and one another. Each migration was not only a journey across the land, but a continuation of knowledge, the path to water, the shelter of caves, the safe places where fire could be built. The landscape was alive with other beings, many now long extinct. Mammoths grazed slowly across meadows, their long tusks curving gracefully, their shaggy coats rippling in the wind. Woolly rhinoceroses trudged along riverbanks, leaving deep impressions in the earth. Herds of bison, stronger and larger than the ones we know today, thundered through valleys, their hooves creating vibrations that echoed in the bones of the ground. And yet, within all this grandeur, the humans remained few, so few that the entire species could be imagined as no larger than a single modern town. This perspective is humbling, for it reminds us of the fragility of existence. For tens of thousands of years, their numbers barely grew. Every illness, every harsh winter, every scarcity of food carried the risk of loss too great to bear. And still, they endured. We might ask ourselves, what gave them the strength to continue? Part of the answer lies in the simple, timeless bonds that connect all human lives. The care of one for another, the warmth of a fire shared, the passing on of a song or a story. These became the invisible threads that wove their survival. Even in the coldest nights, even when the wind howled across the empty plains, there was always the comfort of community. However small in those quiet circles around fire, stories would have been told. They may not have been stories in the way we know them now, with written words and recorded voices, but rather gestures, sounds, and patterns remembered from one night to the next. The rhythm of a story, even without words, could carry reassurance, explaining the world in ways that soothed both children and adults. In these earliest narratives, the seeds of culture were planted, and above them, the sky stretched endlessly. The Ice Age sky would have been deeply familiar to us, constellations forming the same shapes, the Milky Way spanning across the heavens in a glowing band of stars. To those ancient humans, the heavens may have seemed eternal, a reminder of continuity in a world filled with uncertainty. Perhaps they gazed upward and found in the stars a sense of belonging to something far greater than themselves. As the fire dimmed, as the wind whispered through the grasses, sleep would have come to them slowly. In the same way we seek rest tonight, their dreams, like ours, may have been filled with images of the day, of the hunt, of loved ones, of fears and of hopes. In those dreams, humanity carried forward not only survival, but imagination, resilience, and the quiet strength to endure a world far larger than themselves. And so, the night would pass, the dawn would return, and the cycle of survival would begin again. Step by step, season by season, generation by generation, humanity continued, The story of humanity nearly vanishing 900,000 years ago is not something that reveals itself in sudden flashes or dramatic scenes, but in quiet traces, in the faint signatures written into the strands of DNA that all of us still carry today. When researchers first uncovered the evidence that our ancestors had once been reduced to a tiny remnant of their former numbers, it was almost unbelievable. The idea that nearly 99% of ancient humans could have vanished, leaving only a small population to carry our lineage forward, reshapes how we see ourselves. And yet, when told slowly and with patience, the story becomes not a tale of destruction, but of survival. Imagine, for a moment, those humans, living in a world so unlike our own. The planet was caught in cycles of shifting climate, with long stretches of cooling that crept slowly, year after year, until ice spread far across the land and seas receded to reveal windswept plains. In this world, food was not guaranteed, shelter was never certain, and the air itself may have carried a sharp edge of cold. Each season was a test, each migration a gamble. To survive was not something assumed, but something earned, moment by moment, through resilience and cooperation. As the population dwindled, the days must have felt heavy with silence. Where once many groups may have roamed the open landscapes, fewer and fewer remained. Fires would have glowed faintly in the distance, but the spaces between them grew wider, lonelier. Generations would have passed in this narrowed world. Children born into families who carried the memory of larger clans. Elders recalling times when they had encountered more voices, more footsteps across the earth. That memory may have grown dim, as if it belonged to another age. And yet, in those small surviving communities, life carried on with a kind of quiet dignity. The act of sharing food, the careful teaching of how to shape stone into tools, the stories whispered around evening fires, all of these became threads binding people together when everything else seemed fragile. It is in these moments that survival takes root, not in dramatic battles against nature, but in the gentle persistence of daily care. When we look at the genetic record today, what we see is the echo of that persistence. The patterns of reduced diversity, the genetic bottleneck that scientists speak of, is not just a technical finding, but a reminder of how close we came to silence. Yet, rather than silence, the human story continued. Those who lived through that long, narrowing time carried forward the seed of all that we are. Their voices became our voices. Their survival became the foundation for everything that followed. One can imagine the rhythm of their lives, paced by the turning of seasons, by the migrations of animals, by the shifting patterns of plants that could be gathered and stored. Each decision was weighted, each journey uncertain, but with each day survived, the fragile flame of humanity endured. And in that endurance lies something profoundly calming, the recognition that even in the face of immense challenge, life seeks to continue. It holds on in quiet ways, steady and persistent, until the world offers space to grow again. As we reflect on that time, the mind drifts to the landscapes they knew. Valleys shadowed by glaciers, rivers swollen by meltwater, wide grasslands where the wind carried the scent of earth and ice. These were the places where our ancestors walked barefoot, or with simple coverings of hide, where their footprints mingled with those of animals long since gone. The world was vast, and they were few, and yet the bond they shared with the earth was intimate. They knew the signs of weather in the clouds, the tracks of prey in the mud, the hidden roots beneath the soil, and though their numbers were small, their lives were full of meaning. For meaning is not measured in how many exist, but in the care passed between them, in the songs and gestures that carried memory, in the way each generation made space for the next. That is why, even in the smallest population, humanity never truly disappeared. It lived on in the glow of firelight, in the rhythm of footsteps across ancient paths, in the breath of each child who opened their eyes to the vast and mysterious world. The bottleneck, then, is not only a story of reduction, but also of resilience. It is the reminder that our history is fragile, yet enduring, and that we are all connected through those who carried us through the narrowest of times. Without their quiet persistence, none of us would be here. Their story flows into ours like a river that almost vanished underground, only to rise again, carrying the waters of life forward. And as we let this thought settle, there is a sense of calm, a recognition that survival is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the act of holding on, of breathing, of staying together in the face of silence. That is what happened nearly 900,000 years ago. That is why we are here now, able to reflect, able to imagine, able to drift softly into rest with the knowledge that even in the smallest numbers, life continues and hope endures. The long ages of scarcity that defined this bottleneck shaped not only the physical survival of our ancestors but also their relationship to the world around them. When we try to imagine what it must have been like, we must quiet the rush of our modern minds and slow ourselves to their pace. Life was not measured in minutes or hours, but in the steady cycles of light and dark, warmth and cold, hunger and satisfaction. The rhythm of existence was simpler and slower, yet far more precarious. Each morning, the first light would spread across a horizon that looked ancient and untamed. There were no villages, no farms, no cities, only vast landscapes, open and raw. The people who survived this era lived in close kin groups, perhaps only a few families together, moving carefully across their territory. They followed the migrations of animals, for without those herds, survival was nearly impossible. The aurochs, the great deer, the wild horses, and in later ages, mammoths all were essential companions in the long story of human endurance. Hunting such animals was never simple, and rarely certain. Spears tipped with sharpened stone required closeness, courage, and cooperation. A successful hunt was cause for quiet relief rather than celebration, for the food it provided meant another few weeks of security. Yet even in these moments, one imagines the fireside gatherings, the careful division of meat, the gratitude that came with the taste of nourishment in a world that could often feel empty. In the quieter stretches between hunts, gathering provided much of life's sustenance. Edible roots, berries, nuts, and seeds would have been sought with care and patience, each discovered plant carrying within it the promise of life. It is in this way that survival was balanced between the daring and risk of the hunt, and the slow, attentive search for what the earth itself offered. And in these long, slow seasons, something else was preserved: the sharing of knowledge. Each elder carried within them a memory of landscapes, of signs, of hidden streams and caves that could provide shelter. Children, born into the uncertainty of dwindling numbers, learned to read the world through gestures, through stories, through the simple acts of watching and imitating. In this way, knowledge was never written, but carried in living memory. A flame passed carefully from hand to hand, as the population remained small, perhaps only a few thousand across the whole of Africa. A strange silence must have settled over much of the world. Entire regions may have been empty of human presence. Vast landscapes where no fire ever burned, where no voices carried on the wind. Those few who remained may have never known how truly few they were, for the world was too vast to measure. Yet when they traveled long distances without meeting another band, perhaps a faint awareness stirred that humanity was fragile, that they were a rare and scattered presence upon the earth. And yet, within this fragility, bonds grew deeper. Every member of a group mattered. Each person's skill, whether in hunting, gathering, toolmaking, or storytelling, contributed to the survival of all. In such small numbers, the loss of even one life would have been felt profoundly, not just in grief, but in the practical balance of survival. Thus, care for one another became not only emotional, but essential. The sick were tended to, the young were protected, and the elders were listened to, for in their memory lay maps to survival. When we step back and reflect on this time, it brings a sense of perspective. We, who live in a world crowded with billions, owe our existence to groups so small they could have vanished with little trace. And yet they did not vanish. They endured through cold, through hunger, through isolation. They endured, not through domination, but through persistence, through a steady, patient rhythm of life. The world itself mirrored this persistence. Glaciers advanced and retreated, forests shrank and expanded, rivers carved their beds deeper into the land. Each generation of humans was but a passing moment in this grand transformation. Yet within those moments, choices were made. Lives were lived, and a fragile lineage continued. In the evenings, when the sun sank low and the fire's glow was the only warmth, one can imagine the conversations that filled the silence. Perhaps they spoke of the animals they followed, of the seasons that would return, of the ancestors who had once walked with them. Perhaps they whispered to the stars, wondering at their permanence, at their calm presence above a shifting and uncertain earth. The stars were the same then as they are now, a quiet reminder that even as humanity nearly disappeared, the greater universe remained steady. It is soothing to think that in those dark, cold nights, our ancestors looked upward, as we do now, taking comfort in the quiet lights that marked the sky. The stars may have felt like companions, witnesses to their endurance. Perhaps, in their own way, they told stories about those distant points of light, giving them names, weaving them into the fabric of their memory. And in doing so, they anchored themselves to something eternal. This anchoring, this quiet connection to the world beyond their struggles, may have helped carry them through. For survival is not only of the body, but also of the spirit. The ability to hope, to imagine, to feel wonder, these are as important as food and fire. And so, even in the narrowest chapter of human history, our ancestors carried forward not just their genes, but their humanity, their capacity to love, to hope, and to dream beneath the endless sky. And from those small groups, slowly, generation by generation, the population began to grow again. The world warmed in cycles, bringing back periods of abundance, when rivers swelled, when plants spread, when animals thrived. In those times, humans too flourished, spreading slowly across wider landscapes, carrying with them the memory of scarcity, but also the resilience that scarcity had taught them. What we inherit from them is not just survival, but the quiet lesson that life endures even when it feels fragile. Their persistence is our inheritance. Their story is the foundation upon which every later chapter of humanity has been written. The slow regrowth of humanity after the bottleneck was not sudden, but gentle, stretching over tens of thousands of years. In this patient unfolding, each small increase in number represented not only survival, but a fragile kind of victory. It was not the growth of empires or the rise of cities, but the gradual gathering of people around firelight. The slow spread of families across valleys, rivers, and plains. To picture this is to enter a world quieter than our own. The sounds that filled the air were the rustle of grass in the wind, the calls of distant animals, the soft crackling of firewood. Each human voice, rare and precious, carried with it the weight of belonging. To hear another speak was to be reminded that one was not alone, that life continued in company. In such a world, language itself deepened, shaped by the need to share, to guide, to comfort. Perhaps it was during this long period that language grew into something closer to what we know today. With so few people, the sharing of knowledge became essential. Words became tools, as important as stone and fire. Through language, a group could pass on warnings about dangerous animals, instructions about crafting tools, or memories of where food could be found in leaner times. But beyond this, language allowed for stories, for the weaving of meaning into survival. Around the fires, in the long hours of night, elders may have spoken of spirits in the forest, or of ancestors who watched from beyond. They may have described the great animals they followed, not only as prey but as beings with power and mystery. These stories would have given shape to an otherwise uncertain existence, providing a thread of continuity that tied generations together. And in the slow rhythm of these nights, as flames danced and sparks rose, the young would have listened with wide eyes, their minds carried into realms of wonder. The memory of scarcity lingered, shaping the choices of those who lived. Each tool was valued, each resource carefully managed. The breaking of a stone blade was not a small inconvenience, but the loss of hours of work and a crucial aid in survival. And so, patience and precision became woven into daily life. The crafting of tools, the preparation of food, the building of shelters, all were acts done with care, born from necessity. It is easy to imagine that such a life was harsh, yet there was also a certain closeness to the natural world, a rhythm that pulsed in time with the earth itself. People rose with the sun, followed the patterns of animals, gathered what the seasons provided. Nights were filled not with noise or distraction, but with silence, stars, and firelight. In this way, life was both fragile and profoundly connected to the great cycles of nature. As populations slowly increased, small groups would have ventured further afield, testing new rivers, new valleys, new stretches of plain. Each journey was a quiet expansion, carrying with it the memory of the bottleneck, but also the promise of renewal. The world was vast, and though humanity was still few, the earth seemed open, full of possibilities. One can imagine a mother guiding her children across a meadow, pointing out the tracks of animals in the dirt, teaching them to read the subtle signs of the land, or a father showing his son how to set a spear, how to shape a stone so it would hold an edge. In these simple acts, life was preserved, and the future was quietly secured. Generations passed, one after another, like waves upon a shore. Each left behind traces, flakes of stone, the ash of fires, the worn pathways that marked their movements. These traces, though small, became part of the vast tapestry of human endurance, and in time, the ice itself began to retreat. The great glaciers that had covered much of the world melted back, revealing new lands, new rivers, new forests. With the retreat of the cold came a renewal of abundance. Plants flourished, animals multiplied, and humans followed in their footsteps. The bottleneck that had nearly erased humanity gave way to a slow rebirth. But memory is not so easily erased. The stories of hardship, of hunger, of survival against all odds likely remained part of the oral traditions of these early people. Even as abundance returned, they would have remembered the lean times, the fragility of their existence. And so, gratitude may have colored their perception of the world, a gratitude that bound them more deeply to the land, to one another, and to the mysteries of life itself. When we reflect on this era, it is humbling to realize how much of what we take for granted was forged in these long millennia of survival. Our ability to communicate, to cooperate, to imagine, these were not luxuries, but necessities, honed in the crucible of scarcity. Without them, our lineage might not have endured. This endurance is not the story of heroes or conquerors, but of families, of small groups, who cared for one another, who carried fire across windswept plains, who tended the young and remembered the old. It is a story of quiet persistence, of a flame that might have gone out, yet continued to burn, carried carefully through the longest night. And as we listen to this story now, in the comfort of a modern age, we are invited to slow our own pace, to rest in the rhythm of survival, to recognize the fragile yet enduring thread that connects us to those who came before. Their story is not distant, for without it, we would not be here. It lives within us, in our very being, as a quiet echo of the long ages when humanity nearly vanished, but did not. And so, as we come to the end of this long journey across time, we return again to that fragile moment, 900,000 years ago, when humanity stood upon the edge of disappearance. It is a story almost impossible to grasp, for the scale of years is vast, and the numbers themselves so small compared to the billions alive today seem hardly enough to hold the weight of a species' survival. Yet it was enough. Fewer than 2,000 lives, scattered across the plains of Africa, carried within them the spark of all that would follow. From those few, the great unfolding of humanity continued. It is humbling to imagine that every person alive today, every face, every voice, every culture, every story, descends from that narrow thread of endurance. Without their persistence, their patience, their ability to adapt and endure, there would be no history, no art, no language, no memory of who we are. Their survival is the root from which all human experience has grown. And yet, in that time, there was no thought of the future as we think of it now. There were no grand visions, no empires, no monuments. Life was lived from day to day, from season to season, guided by hunger and shelter, by fire and family. Each moment was immediate, and in its immediacy, it was complete. They did not know they were the ancestors of all to come. They only knew the rhythms of the earth, the nearness of danger, and the comfort of togetherness. To reflect on this is to recognize that survival itself can be profound. The simple act of living, of continuing, of carrying on through hardship, is its own kind of greatness. The ancestors who endured did not leave behind marble statues or carved records, but they left us something far greater, the chance to be. Every heartbeat now, every breath, is part of the gift they preserved when the world grew thin around them. The earth has always moved in cycles, ice advancing, then retreating, life shrinking, then blooming again. And within those cycles, humanity has risen and fallen, struggled and thrived. Our ancestors were not separate from these cycles. They were bound to them, as we still are. The glaciers that once threatened to erase us also shaped the rivers and valleys that would later nourish us. The hardships that nearly destroyed us also forged the resilience we carry to this day. When the ice retreated and abundance returned, humanity spread once more. Families became clans, clans became larger groups, and slowly, across countless generations, the great migration outward began. Africa, the cradle of our beginnings, would one day send its people across the earth, Europe, into Asia, into Australia, into the vast Americas. Yet, at the heart of this expansion lies that fragile moment when survival was uncertain. Without that moment, the later journey would never have been. The story of the bottleneck is not only about numbers, nor about science, nor even about history. It is, in its deepest sense, a reminder of fragility, of how precious and delicate life truly is. To know that our entire species, once balanced on the edge of extinction, can bring us a new appreciation for the present, for the fact that we are here at all. It is a reminder that survival is never guaranteed, and that endurance, though quiet, is powerful. Perhaps, in listening to this story, we can feel a kind of kinship with those ancient people. They are distant from us in time, yet their lives were shaped by emotions we still know: the love of family, the fear of loss, the hope for tomorrow. They gazed at the same stars, felt the warmth of fire, listened to the cries of animals in the night. In their footsteps we can find the beginnings of ourselves, and in their endurance we can find reassurance. As this journey across deep time draws to a close, let the story settle like a gentle rhythm within you. The past is vast, stretching far beyond our own lives, and yet it touches us still. We are, each of us, the continuation of that long thread. When we breathe, when we dream, when we live quietly in our own way, we are carrying forward the flame that once seemed so close to going out. So let the story soften now, like embers fading in the night. Picture the last of the ice retreating, rivers flowing once more, green returning to the valleys. Imagine the small groups of early humans gathered together beneath the stars, their fires flickering, their voices low. Around them, the night is vast and full of silence, yet within their circle there is warmth, safety, and the promise of another dawn. Theirs was not a story of glory, but of patience. Not a story of conquest, but of care. And perhaps, in the quiet of this moment, as you drift towards sleep, you can carry with you the same calm endurance. For just as they endured the long winter of the earth, so too can we endure the winters of our own lives, trusting that warmth and light will return again. Close your eyes now, and rest in the knowledge that you are part of this unbroken line. The struggles of those who came before you are carried within you, not as a burden, but as strength. Their survival is your existence, their persistence is your story, and their quiet flame still burns, gently, steadily, in you. The night is long, but life endures, and in that endurance there is peace.